welcome to the show. It is The Alchemist and the Scribe. I am the scribe, Renee, and with me is the alchemist, Anae Campbell. And today we're going to talk about how she got started. This is an amazing journey that she and I have decided to embark on to write her book called The Alchemy of Isness. And as a ghostwriter, I'm throwing back the curtain of what we do and sharing with you, along with Anae and her special gift of being able to share her story, what as ghostwriters, what we do. And this is one of the things we record. And so we're going to record a series of interviews with Anae about her story and her life. And I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to have her come on and introduce herself and then talk a little bit about, for her, when her life started. Normally in a ghostwriting, we don't do this, but hers is such an amazing story that we're actually going to start about 3 years old with her when she was diagnosed with polio. So, Anae, please tell us about that, would you?
Hi, yeah, this is Anae. I'm glad to be here and sharing. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to share, and the way that we get to share in our modern world. And I'm real excited about sharing this with friends. I've said something to a few of my friends to say, you know, this is what I'm going to do. And they're all so excited about hearing my days. And I did a radio program live in Ohio several weeks ago, and I've shared that with some people, and they're going, oh, I found out some things I didn't know about you. And that's kind of fun because, you know, some of my close friends think they know everything, but they don't.
You know, that's the truth. Not all of us know everything about everyone. So it's good to know, especially your close friends, good to know that we might have something new to tell them. So talk to me about the polio.
Well, okay. I grew up, my father being a minister, and he was in college when I was a very young child. He surrendered to preach when I was about 9 months old. We were in Wyoming, and he moved from Wyoming, having been in the oil fields, working for Western Geophysical, to Portales, New Mexico, where Eastern New Mexico University is, where I returned back to school as well. And anyway, my mother was sick, or the story goes this way. You know, you never know these stories. And when they're 70-something years old, hello, what's the truth, actually? But as the story goes, my mother was ill a lot, and when I was a little girl, so I would go with my dad to these little bitty churches out in the country. And to one particular one was in a town called Rogers, New Mexico, which is not here anymore. Or there. Yeah. It's not underneath my feet in New Mexico, but it's about 250 miles from me probably. And that's to say that New Mexico is a pretty big sized state. Most people don't know that. So one afternoon, and I remember going with Dad a lot of times by ourselves. And one of the things that happened, because the churches paid him very little money, like $15 a week, perhaps. Sometimes he hitchhiked down because Mother was doing something with the car or whatever, I don't know, or maybe the car wasn't working. But this time, I mean, most of the time he would leave me because the churches said, you know, the families there, they were farmers or ranchers, and they would say, well, we'll take care of her during the week, and that'll help you guys. You know, that was the way they gave him a bonus, I guess, for preaching or whatever. I don't know. You know.
So let me interrupt for a second. So, and question: you hadn't yet been diagnosed; you were just ill, right?
No, I wasn't ill at all. This happened. Everything happened on a Sunday afternoon, and we had gone to some a rancher's home to have the gospel goose lunch. That was what it's known for, because everybody, I mean, shoot, we were poor people, you know, so chicken was available, so we had chicken, and it was called the gospel goose. So we had lunch, and they were branding cattle. And so I went out because I love cows. I love cows. I love horses. And I went out and sat on the fence and watched them brand. So when they called to come back in the house and freshen up for going to church on Sunday evening, because
Right.
being a Baptist preacher, you go to church on 3 times a week. You go
Right.
Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Prayer meeting on Wednesday night or Bible study.
Right.
So anyway, they called me to get down off the fence, and I couldn't get down. And they came over to get me down off the fence, and I was burning up with a really, really high fever.
Oh, wow.
And so the movement of trying to get me off the fence, I was crying and so forth. And off they went to town. I think they probably canceled church that evening and went to town very quickly to the doctor's office where my mother worked, actually, for Dr. Renee in Portales. And he said, get this child immediately to Albuquerque. And so we went to Albuquerque, which is from Portales to Albuquerque in those days would have been maybe 3-hour drive. And I still remember Daddy coming into the back door of this hospital. I can see it in my mind, and driving, backing up the car to this emergency door, and which were very different then than now. This is 1949. And the diagnosis was meningitis and paralytic polio, and I was paralyzed on my right side, burning up with a fever, and put in an iron lung because it was not breathing. So, wow. So 3.5 and put in isolation.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine at that age what would happen.
Well, the iron lungs of those days were, you didn't ever get out of them. If you got in them, you didn't get out of them. I mean, a ventilator now is risky to take a person off of it, but gives a person a little more chance, I think, than being breathed for and all. And big old long tube, and they reached in with these big old brown and black, or I think they were brown as my memory, and they're probably black, but anyway, they reach in and take care of you and change you and wash you and all this kind of stuff, because you're so contaminating. Also was the thought then that you were going to give off everything. So it was a very traumatic place for me, and I would cry for my daddy, and they would tell me that he was out preaching for God to render a miracle. And after a couple of days of that, I didn't like it too good because I couldn't see him.
I can't imagine why, not being able to see your father. And at that time, you really adored your father, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I was Daddy's girl. I mean, I was Daddy's girl. I went everywhere with Daddy. I remember sitting, in the seat at the side of the car, and he taught me we sang together, and he taught me how to keep time. And I remember my little bitty feet keeping time right underneath him, right beside him. And my feet were not even as long as his knees, because he was like 6'4". So here's my little knees, about half thigh, but I remember my little feet just keeping time, even after I got out of the hospital. But that timing. And of course, while it was going on, and I do have huge recall on that because it sets us in place, and it's the framework. Actually, that scene was the framework for the work that I do, and how that goes from finding out that we as children make our decisions about what we think life is, and we make our decisions and kind of lock in the definition of life by about 5 or 6 years old. And so that was, I remember, little things that were on the bedside table. Once I did get out of the iron lung, they put me in this big ward. And not only was I in isolation, but I was the only one in the hospital, because it was a brand new hospital for a little while. And they'd put me down at the window where I could see out. And if I threw up, they'd stick me in a crib in the back of the room, and I wouldn't be able to see out. So I learned to not throw up. That was a biggie.
He,
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't like it too good.
So for you, there was a direct correlation between throwing up and bad things happening. So you basically taught yourself not to throw up.
Oh yeah, he just swallowed everything.
Now, if that's not a metaphor for something, I don't, what, there's a quote right there.
You just swallow it. Just keep it down. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Wow,
Yeah, there's power.
it is. And see, and that is a testimony to the neurointegration work and finding out that those are the things that come creeping out of your subconscious, you know, that tell you how things are for you. And so I guess I lived a lot like that. I know later in life and later in my studies and later in for instance in NLP, neuro linguistic programming, there is a technique called timeline therapy, and I went back into that scene several times in the timeline therapy to create again experiencing in my emotional body, because in your emotional body everything is stored, and in experiencing through my emotional body those things that we say, like I can swallow anything, and
Right.
what
Words, the power of words.
the power for sure, because I really was known and began to be known for not only my determination but the fact that I can handle anything. I can handle it. And
Mm-hmm.
um, the big thing for me, one of the biggest things for me in that process was I did not like God too much. Now Jesus was my friend, but Jesus and God were two different entities and
Right.
two different energetics as we know them today, or as I know them today. And my favorite song was Jesus Loves Me. I sang it all the time. I rocked myself to sleep with Jesus Loves Me. I won a big music contest with an arrangement of Jesus Loves Me at one point in time in my life. And I could still sing it today. But
Okay, next, there's going to be a recording where you sing that because I know your voice is amazing, so I'd like to hear that.
well, someday maybe we will do that. I'm not in voice right now. That's for sure. I can talk, that's for sure. But anyway, it was a real question for a long time, because I didn't like God, because God took away my papa. But the other thing that happened that reoccurred many times, and as I began to have my practice and working with people and all, it was a mystery at one point in time, because I found myself not liking the fact that people came to me expecting a miracle. And because that was whispered in my ear, your daddy's out preaching, so God will give us a miracle.
Ah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was also my father's promise. When I was 8 months old in Wyoming, I had pneumonia. Again, this is how the story goes. And I was told that my father was an alcoholic, and my
Mm-hmm.
mother somehow or another convinced him that if he'd give the bottle up and promise God he'd preach the rest of his life, that my life would be saved. So that puts another little anchor on top of your head, or a hat, that says that. And when my father was passing, he recalled that he had not missed a handful of Sundays preaching to somebody about God. And I said, Dad, you hadn't missed a day. You made your promise and you kept it. And the promise was, if I would live, he would preach the gospel the rest of his life. And he certainly did. In fact, the last few moments of his life were preachers in his room asking his permission to preach the sermon that they wanted to have on Sunday morning, and as if he had his disciples. So that was pretty interesting. So it set a stage, it set a big stage for me and my relationship to what I thought God was.
Right.
And wow. So.
And it also informed, because, you know, you and I have had conversations before, it informed that whole principle of what we speak, what we state, we create.
Right. Right.
Because there
Yeah.
was a statement made and it was created.
Right. Yeah. The statement is, if you'll save my daughter, I'll preach the rest of my life. Well, he was a man of great value there. So there's another place where I learned the importance of words, you know, and the importance of, and the very big importance of doing what you say you're going to do. And I think that's one of my pet peeves with people, is that if you tell me you're going to do something, by golly, you better do it. And one of my biggest disappointments then was for my daddy to lie to me. Now, my mama was a different story, but my daddy to tell me something that was not true, or to try to convince me to do something and change my attitude or my will about something. And, you know, in those days, we didn't talk to children, we made them behave. And daddy would, for instance, if I was wiggling around in church when he had set me down on the front pew on the corner, if I was wiggling around, he bragged about the fact that he didn't miss a word of his sermon, and went down and paddled me on the popo and set me back down and made me behave. And he went back to the pulpit and kept on going. But a fun story, will put a fun story in here, is I used to play with Salapotica bottles. What do you call that? Salapotic? No, not Sala. Well, got my tongue tangled today.
Yeah, I can't even.
Old medicine bottles that had effervescent stuff in them. Anyway, okay. I had those, and I played with them in the dirt and in the mud. And so Daddy would say to me, "You better get out of that water. Your mama's going to spank you." So I'm standing beside my mother in his first time to baptize somebody. And he steps off into the baptistry, and they still have them now, but they're kind of they're more decorated than in these little bitty churches. You know, there's a tub of water in the front of the church. He steps off down in it, and I see the water move, and I say, "Daddy, you better get out of that water. Your mama's gonna spank you."
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. I know. Yeah, all of us have stories like that.
So I think we should stop right here. To be continued.
I think that's perfect. I do. Anae, thank you so much for this recording. This is, yeah, I love these stories, and I can't wait for excuse me. Notice I said that, can't wait. Talk about words. I am excited and thrilled for our next interview. And we'll discuss the can't wait part.
You betcha.
Okay. Talk to you next time.
All right.